My name is Emeka. I'm 57 years old. For most of my life, I thought I had everything under control. My days were quiet and peaceful. I lived with my wife, Clara, in a small home far from the noise of the city. We were surrounded by trees and open land, the same place I had hunted and played in as a boy. Life was simple and I liked it that way. I wasn't into modern things. I didn't care for social media, smartphones, or any of that. I grew up working with my hands, getting dirt under my nails, and I believed in keeping things plain and honest. Then one weekend, my oldest son, Chinedu, came to visit. We sat outside, like we usually did, talking and drinking something cold. He looked at me and said, "Dad, why don't you try getting on social media? That way you can keep in touch with the family, see what everyone's up to. It's not a bad thing." First I laughed. Me? On Facebook? But the house had become so quiet lately, and I started thinking, maybe he was right. Maybe seeing what my old friends and family were doing wouldn't hurt. So, with Chinedu's help, I created a Facebook account. He even took a photo of me and uploaded it. In the beginning, I genuinely enjoyed the experience. It was fascinating and even fun to see how everyone had changed over the decades. I reconnected with old classmates I hadn't spoken to since we were teenagers. I laughed at shared memories of our school days, smiled warmly at pictures of my children and their own growing families, and felt a sense of wonder at how technology could bridge such vast distances in years. For the first time in a very long while, I felt truly connected to a larger community, to the broader story of all the lives that had touched mine over the years. But slowly, something began to shift inside me. First, I didn't notice, but little by little, I found myself checking Facebook more and more. I saw pictures of people on vacation, smiling with their families, buying new cars, moving into nicer homes. Some were celebrating their kids' weddings or welcoming new grandchildren. And there I was, in my chair, staring at the screen, wondering, why not me? A strange feeling began to grow in my chest. I didn't want to call it envy at first. I thought I was just observing. But it wasn't just watching, it was comparing. It was questioning. I began to feel like I hadn't done enough in life, like I was falling behind. I had worked hard all my life. I wasn't lazy. But still, I looked at those photos and felt small. It got worse. I began to criticize people in my thoughts. I saw smiling couples and thought, they're just pretending. Nobody's that happy. I saw someone post about a fancy dinner and thought, they probably can't afford that. It's all for show. Every day I opened my phone first thing in the morning. Every chance I had, I scrolled. I wasn't posting, I wasn't saying anything out loud, but inside me, I was full of judgment. And I told myself it didn't matter, since I never said it to anyone. It was just private thoughts. But deep inside, those thoughts were changing me. One Saturday morning in early December, Clara announced she was going to the village market to buy ingredients for Sunday's meal. I decided this would be a perfect time to go hunting, something I hadn't done in months because I'd been so consumed with my phone. I desperately needed fresh air, physical movement, and the kind of peace I used to find among the trees and wildlife. So I took my old hunting rifle, checked that it was properly loaded, and walked purposefully into the dense forest behind our house. The wind moved gently through the branches above me, creating that familiar whisper I'd loved since childhood. Birds sang their afternoon songs. The earth smelled rich and alive under my feet. But despite being surrounded by this natural cathedral, my heart remained heavy, burdened by the poison I'd been feeding it for months. The night before, I had spent over an hour looking at pictures of Obinna, an old classmate who had just purchased a beautiful boat. The photos showed him smiling broadly with his wife and adult children, all of them wearing expensive-looking clothes and life jackets, clearly having the time of their lives on some pristine lake. I couldn't stop staring at those images, and the familiar bitterness rose in my throat like bile. How can he afford that? He never did better than me in school. His family wasn't any richer than mine. What makes him so special? The resentment burned under my skin like a fever. I didn't want to feel that way. Part of me knew it was wrong, unchristian, destructive, but I couldn't seem to help myself. The feelings had taken root too deeply. I walked deeper and deeper into the forest, not really paying attention to where I was going, too lost in my dark thoughts to notice the terrain changing around me. That's when it happened. I stepped carelessly on a moss-covered rock that was slicker than ice, hidden treacherously under a pile of wet autumn leaves. I lost my footing completely. I fell harder than I'd ever fallen in my life, tumbling down a steep, rocky slope that seemed to go on forever. My head struck a jagged boulder with a sickening crack, and everything went completely black. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Maybe it was just a few minutes. Maybe it was hours. Time seemed to have no meaning. But when I opened my eyes, when consciousness slowly returned to me, I wasn't in the forest anymore. I wasn't anywhere on earth that I recognized. The ground beneath me was black. Not just dark, but completely black, like it had been burned by fires hotter than anything imaginable. Thick, acrid smoke rose continuously from deep cracks in this charred earth, creating an atmosphere so thick and poisonous it burned my lungs with every breath. The air itself was unbearably hot and heavy, pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. It hurt just to breathe, as if the very atmosphere was hostile to life. The sky above was a terrifying red darkness, neither day nor night but something far worse, punctuated by sudden, violent flashes of light that looked like fire tearing through storm clouds. The silence was unnatural, oppressive, broken only by distant, agonized screams that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to stand, though every part of my body ached as if I'd been beaten. I looked around in growing horror and realized with absolute certainty. This wasn't a dream, wasn't a hallucination from my head injury. I was in a place I had only heard about in Sunday sermons, a place I'd always believed in intellectually but never imagined experiencing personally. I was standing in hell itself. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, barren, lifeless, hopeless. And then, as my eyes adjusted to the hellish light, I saw them clearly. People. Not demons, not monsters from religious artwork, but actual human beings.
But they weren't whole, weren't the way people should be. They were twisted by suffering, crying endlessly, reaching upward toward the dark sky, as if desperately begging for help that would never come. Their faces showed a depth of pain I had never imagined possible. Physical, emotional, and spiritual agony all combined into something indescribable. They were shouting, screaming, pleading, but no sound came from their mouths. Their lips moved frantically, but it was as if their voices had been stolen, leaving them trapped in silent, eternal torment. As I walked through this nightmare landscape, driven by some compulsion I couldn't understand, I began to recognize some faces. These weren't strangers. They were people I knew, people from my own life. I saw Mrs. Adora, who used to sell vegetables in our village market. I saw Emeka, my namesake, who had owned the small shop where I bought kerosene for our lamps. Most shocking of all, I saw Ngozi, a woman I knew very well from our church. She had been known for her kindness, always helping widows and orphans, always praying fervently during service. She had lived a tough life, losing her husband young and raising 5 children alone, but she had done it with grace and faith. But there she was, suffering exactly like all the rest, her face contorted with the same indescribable agony. Then, behind me, I felt a presence that made my blood freeze. I turned slowly and saw a dark figure emerging from the shadows, something that had once been human, but was now something else entirely. It had the general shape of a man, but its face was torn and ravaged by what looked like eternal grief, as if it had once known perfect peace and joy, but had lost them forever and could never stop mourning that loss. Its eyes were empty, hollow, but somehow it looked at me as though it could see directly into my soul, reading every secret I'd ever kept. My voice was barely a whisper when I asked, "Who are you?" The figure replied in a voice that rumbled to the ground beneath my feet, shaking me to my core. "I was once like you, brother. I preached God's word from the pulpit. I prayed publicly and privately. I led people in worship and faith. Everyone in my community respected me, looked up to me as a man of God. But my heart, my hidden heart, was full of judgment and pride. I watched others constantly, comparing myself to them, feeling jealous when they succeeded, feeling superior when they failed. I criticized them in my thoughts, tore them down in my mind, felt resentment toward those who seemed blessed while I struggled. I never said these things out loud, never spoke my judgments publicly. I thought I was clean because I kept my poison private. But inside, where only God could see, I was rotting. My soul was diseased. And now I'm here forever. I felt my heart begin to pound with recognition and terror. I knew this figure wasn't just telling me his own story. He was describing my life, my own hidden sins, my own secret thoughts. Everything he confessed, I had done too. The silent judging, the private envy, the bitter comparisons, the resentful thoughts I convinced myself were harmless because no one else could hear them. Tears began to fill my eyes as the horrible truth crashed over me like a wave. But I never did anything actually wrong. I protested desperately. I never hurt anyone. I never spoke these thoughts aloud. I kept them to myself. The figure shook his head slowly, sadly, with infinite regret. Sin isn't only in actions, my brother. It lives in the heart, grows in the mind, poisons the soul. Jesus taught us clearly not to judge others, for we will be judged by the same measure. He called us to love unconditionally, not to compare ourselves endlessly to our neighbors. You watched others and let bitterness take root and grow. You fed resentment daily with that cursed device. You may not have shouted your judgments from the rooftops, but your soul was speaking them constantly, and God heard every word. His words hit me like a physical blow, knocking me to my knees on that burning ground. For the first time, I saw the absolute truth of what I had become over these past months. I had let technology lead me into sin so subtle, I hadn't even recognized it as sin. I had poisoned my own heart with comparison and envy, and I had done it while thinking I was just staying connected with people. In that moment of complete brokenness, I looked up into the dark, burning sky and whispered with every fiber of my being, "Lord, forgive me. I didn't understand what I was doing. I was spiritually blind. Please have mercy." And suddenly, instantly, everything disappeared. I woke up in a hospital room, fluorescent lights blazing too brightly above me, making my head throb. Machines beeped and hummed around me, monitoring vital signs I was barely aware of. My head felt like it had been split open, and I could barely move without waves of nausea washing over me. But then I heard the most beautiful sound in any world. Clara's voice, shaking with emotion, tears streaming down her face. "Emeka, you're awake." "Oh, thank God you're awake." Now, each and every day, I pray differently than I ever have before. I ask God specifically to change my heart, to heal the wounded places where envy and judgment had taken root. I ask Him to help me love others instead of judging them, to teach me to look at everyone with mercy and compassion, rather than criticism and comparison. Sometimes the old patterns of thinking try to return, but now I catch them quickly and stop myself. I ask, why am I feeling this way? What is still broken inside me that needs God's healing touch? True spiritual healing isn't quick or easy. Some days are harder than others. Old habits of thought try to resurface. But I know now with absolute certainty that the real enemy was never outside me. It wasn't the smiling photos or the happy posts or the people who seemed more blessed than me. The real enemy was the voice inside my own head, the one that whispered lies about my worth, stirred up jealousy toward others, and made me feel like what God had given me wasn't enough. I still walk through that same forest sometimes, following the exact path where I once fell and nearly lost my soul. But now I walk differently. I listen carefully to the wind moving through the branches. I feel the solid earth beneath my feet with gratitude. I thank God for every breath, for every heartbeat, for the gift of life and consciousness. I've stopped looking outward at what others have. Now, I look inward at what God is doing in my own heart. Thank you for listening to my story with open hearts. If it has touched you in any way, if it has made you think about your own relationship with social media, comparison, or hidden judgments, please share it with others who might need to hear this message. Leave a comment below, and let's build a genuine community where we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Your support and your own stories mean more than you could possibly know. May God bless each of you richly.